Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to another weekly reading wrap-up wherein I tell you about all the things I finished reading in the past 7 days. I had a good reading week. I finished a bunch of things. In fact, I think I finished pretty much a book per day until the weekend came around and I got busy with other things. But yeah, it was a good week for finishing things and starting a bunch of other books. So I'm going to start out with mentioning that I did finish Exhalation, Stories by Ted Chiang. This is his second story collection that just came out in May. As many of you probably know by now, I adored his first collection, Stories of Your Life and Others, and so I had a lot of high expectations going into Exhalation. I'm actually going to talk about this and some of the individual stories in it in a separate video because I have a feeling I will want to talk about multiple things and it will get very long. The short version is that this has some really excellent longer novelette and novella length stories in it. I do not love it as much as Stories of Your Life and Others, but it is still pretty dang good. Next up, I want to talk about Severance by Ling Ma. This is a literary fiction, end-of-the-world zombie novel that kind of makes it sound like it's something it's not, but I'm gonna go with that description. I went into this book having forgotten most of the description. I had seen or read reviews of it before, but it just frankly forgot about it. I never thought I would actually read it. So while reading it, I really didn't know it was going to happen. I didn't really have expectations, and I think that was a good thing. It's about the end of the world when a pandemic hits, this thing called Chiang fever, which is like a fungal infection, takes over the world, basically turns people into zombies who get stuck in their cozy routines, unaware of the world, and they keep doing the same thing over and over again until they drop dead because their bodies stop working. And it follows or is narrated by a survivor named Candace Chen. She's basically the last person to walk out of New York City alive. And the story is told in two alternating chapter ways. The first series of chapters is basically Candace telling you her life story, how she ended up where she is, what her life has been like, why she stayed in New York City. And then the other series of chapters is after she has joined together with a band of other survivors. Their leader, this like ex-IT professional named Bob, is leading them to a place called the Facility near Chicago, where he says they will have everything they need to survive the end of the world. So yeah, how did Candace end up with these people and what in the world are they going to do next? I'm going to take a bit of the easy way out. I usually don't do this, but actually the Poptimist did a really good review of Severance where he explained probably better than I just did what the book is about. And I would recommend watching that if you are really interested in knowing more about this book. I think that is the first time I ever heard about it, and it did pique my interest at the time, and also the Poptimist does great reviews. So I think this book kind of paints a picture of modern life, especially maybe modern life for millennials, that I just didn't really like. I felt like Candace was sleepwalking through life in a state that is almost like the fever to zombie state. Even though she's not supposed to be infected, she just does the same thing over and over again, clocking into a job that doesn't really exist anymore, doing the routine until she can no longer even pretend to herself that there is a reason for doing it, and only then getting out when it's pretty much too late. And I was really frustrated by what felt like this emotional void in the character. She doesn't seem to really be feeling anything, and she's so isolated and alone, so absorbed with her own routines that she barely looks up to recognize other people are around her, to forge real relationships. She doesn't fit in. And it's almost like this implication that so many people don't, you know? What does it mean when you cannot really tell the difference between the people who are the zombies and the people who aren't the zombies? Yeah, it was very melancholy for me. I read this with a group of friends and we were talking about it, and it's pointed out to me that there are probably a lot of people, maybe right out of college, 20-somethings, who can kind of understand the feeling and the life that Candace is going through, that sense of not having a purpose yet. And maybe what I missed is that I don't actually really know what that's like. I did not really go through that period in my own life. I've always had a purpose and a goal that I've been pretty actively working towards. And so I couldn't really see any of myself in these characters, and yeah. But it was still interesting. I don't necessarily like what the characters were doing, what their decisions were, but I did like the kind of apocalypse book this was. Instead of going out with a bang with violence and fighting and chaos, the world goes out with this very subtle whimper where it's basically over before anybody really realizes what's going on. So yeah. After that, I read The Sumage Solution by Gail Carriger. This is one of her more graphic, intense romances under her G.L. Carriger pen name. I decided to pick this up right after I finished The Fifth Gender, which is her most recent science fictional romance, because I really enjoyed that one. And I've had Sumage Solution sitting around on my Kindle since it came out. I think I pre-ordered it years ago. I thought it was okay. It turned out to really not be my thing. It is the first book in a new series, the San Andreas Shifters. I think that book 2 is already out actually, and it is contemporary supernatural romance following the members of a werewolf pack that have relocated from the East Coast to the West Coast and want to settle, I think, the Bay Area. So this book, The Sumage Solution, is about a human mage called a Sumage. I think he's basically a failed magician who meets the beta of this werewolf pack, and they, you know, get hot and heavy with each other. And of course there's the slightly formulaic plot twist where they suddenly think they can't be together and there's been a misunderstanding and they have to get over that so that, you know, they have the happy ever after. Yeah, like I said, this was all right. I think my issue with this is that it is about contemporary modern day werewolves, and I'm really not into that, especially in male-male romance. I just really don't jive with the dynamic in werewolf packs, especially in the modern day for some reason. I've been trying to think why this is, because I'm really into the werewolf romances, like the Biffy Lyle romance from the Parasol verse that Carriger writes, but I think it's something particular about the Parasol verse that makes that work for me, whereas it didn't so much in this. I also kind of wonder if the San Andreas Shifters book is actually meant to be a modern day period in the Parasol verse. Given some of the references to the world building, I thought that might be the case, but don't quote me on that, it may be completely unrelated. But for whatever reason, it just didn't click with me very much. It was written okay, the characters were okay, but it just felt relatively flat for me most of the way through it. Like I said, I think there's already a second book out in this series and a third and final one planned. I'm not actually sure if I will continue with them or not. After that, however, I read a book that I thoroughly enjoyed and that probably really surpassed the expectations that I had for it, and that was The Consuming Fire by John Scalzi. This is the second book in his Interdependency series. It is the sequel to The Collapsing Empire, and it is a new universe. It is not the Old Man's War universe, which is where most of Scalzi's previous books have been set. And I liked The Collapsing Empire when it came out, mainly because I find the fundamental premise of this series to be really interesting. It is about an interstellar empire called the Interdependency that is threatened when the flow, like the interstellar faster than light highway system, they liken it to a river actually, I think. It started to collapse and the various sites of the far-flung interdependency are going to be completely cut off, and this is going to be chaos, death, the end of civilization. The newly crowned ruler of the interdependency knows that the flow collapse is happening, and she is trying to convince people that not only is it going to happen, but it has already started happening and they need to prepare in some way for it. And I find that whole premise to be really interesting. I think I really latched onto it originally because it seems like a really good parallel for climate change actually, and climate change denial and all of that. The second book, The Consuming Fire, continues that story, brings back a lot of the characters. There aren't many new characters to get to know in it, and I feel like the characters were more distinct from each other than they were in the first book. The first book, I thought people were too similar, talked too much like each other and everything, very much the Scalzi kind of character all around. Maybe it's because I've had some distance from Scalzi's work, or it's just been a while since I read about the characters, but they seemed more like individuals to me in The Consuming Fire, and I liked seeing how they're going off and doing their own little plots and agendas and trying to figure out what to do next. There's also an element in the second half of The Consuming Fire. It's basically an anthropological moment where people get access to a system that had been cut off, and they kind of go there to see what happened and maybe to learn some lessons from it that they can use to prepare for the flow collapse. And I really enjoyed that development. For some reason, it got me really excited. So yeah, I got done with this book and felt like it had been super fun, super fast, and I really want to know what the conclusion is going to be. It's pretty rare, I think, that I feel like a second book in a series is definitely better than the first and doesn't have middle book syndrome, but this one really did its own thing and wasn't just a bridge between the first and the third books, and I thought that was great. And finally, I finished Henry VI Part 3 by William Shakespeare, so I am done with the 3 parts of Henry VI's reign. I talked about the first 2 parts and kind of this last week, so I'm not going to repeat myself too much here, but really enjoy the history. By the time that I got to the end of Part 3, I was finding the characters based on historical people to be really interesting. People like Queen Margaret, for example. Everybody in this just keeps changing their mind, changing their stance, and it's all personal vendettas getting in the way of actually leading a country. It feels like people are making very emotional decisions based on their honor, what happened to their family, rather than thinking about how to end this chaos and actually bring in an era of peace and stability. Everybody's just so intent on having their butt be on the throne. And the end, like the second half, I think, of Henry VI Part 3 is really where Richard, the Duke of Gloucester, starts his scheming to eventually end up on the throne as well. His older brother Edward had deposed Henry VI, and now Richard wants to eliminate his brothers so that he will end up on the throne as well. And that is what is going on in Richard III, which is the play that I am currently reading, and it is really good. It is so villainous. Wow, but it's good. With that, I think I am done. Those are all the things that I finished reading this past week. Do let me know if you have any thoughts on them. Leave me some comments down below. Thank you very much for watching as always, and I will talk to you again soon. And until then, bye.